Good evening. Welcome to the Barbara Lee and Elihu Harris Lecture Series. My name is Karen Bolke, and I am the Director of Government Relations for the Martin Luther King Jr. Freedom Center. I just wanted to start this evening acknowledging and expressing gratitude to Dr. Roy Wilson, who's listed in the program as moderator, for the opportunity to be tapped on the shoulder to moderate this evening. So I'm very happy to be with each and every one of you. Over the course of the past 12 years now, the Martin Luther King Jr. Freedom Center and Peralta Community College have brought some of our nation's leading human and civil rights leaders, those who have really exemplified the civil rights and human rights struggles of our people. And those lectures have centered on the theme of Dr. King's seminal question, where do we go from here? Chaos or community? Tonight, uniquely, we have the esteemed pleasure of having one of Oakland's own as our guest speaker. And many of you in this room, we know your family to our lecture series, and I know many of you know Mr. Virtual Morel, a dedicated contributor to the ever more urgent task of promoting and protecting democracy. To those of you in our listening audience tonight, we thank you for joining us, and to all of you here this evening, we are very grateful for your presence. Our first speaker this evening is the president of Merritt College, Dr. David Johnson. Dr. Johnson has worked in various administrative capacities in Livermore, Redwood City prior to coming to Merritt College, and also was a professor at the University of Washington and Cal State East Bay and Berkeley College, I believe, if I have that right, for some 15 years, which have all contributed greatly to his worldview and his excellent leadership. And on behalf of the Freedom Center, we're deeply honored to have our offices here at Merritt College as well. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Johnson.
Good evening, everyone. I want to start off by making something very clear, but I'm from Oakland. Make that clear. K through 12, Sequoia, Bret Harte, and Oakland High. My name is David Johnson, and I have the honor and pleasure of serving as the president of Merritt College. I want to welcome you all to our beautiful campus tonight and invite you actually to return to take in the view or take a stroll or take a class. I'm also very proud of our long-standing association with the Martin Luther King Jr. Freedom Center, given its noble mission of advancing civic engagement, ethical leadership, and equity. The Barbara Lee Elihu Harris Lecture Series in general, and tonight's talk in particular by Mr. Virtual Morel, are in the service of that mission. The question at hand, where do we go from here, chaos or community, is of critical importance. I think it's patently clear that we're in crisis right now, at least in Oakland. Being from here, I feel I can say that, but also around the world as well. I think our future as a city, as a nation, as a global community will be determined by our ability to think through and reckon with our challenges. And I think someone with Mr. Morel's experience, circumspection, and commitment to empowerment, justice, and freedom, he's well positioned to help lead that conversation. So we are fortunate to have him here with us tonight. And with that said, I'd like us to open our minds and our hearts lock in and have an edifying evening. Thank you.
The Martin Luther King Jr. Freedom Center works with young people throughout the East Bay, Yolo County, down to Santa Clara County. And as Dr. Johnson mentioned, our task is to assist our young people in the process of really gaining their voices through advocacy and being civically engaged. Many of you have seen our young people at past lectures. And certainly in the community doing meaningful work. Tonight we would like to invite two of the students of the Freedom Center to come forward and share a few thoughts with us before we call forth our speaker of the evening. So I would like to invite Arsema Abera and Finn Mano Champu from the Martin Luther King Jr. Freedom Center.
Good evening, everyone. To combine empathy, cooperation, and solidarity leads to meaningful change. It enables the creation of policies, initiatives, and movements that challenge and dismantle the structures that preserve things like white supremacy. Building coalitions and alliances among different organizations is an important way to deal with unjust public schools, racism in the criminal justice system, and killer cops. Going to rallies, cleanups for the community, and getting up early to do serious work are all things that contribute to working together. We become so indulged in our personal lives that we fail to recognize the challenges faced by others, which creates division and hinders progress towards our collective goals. This lack of awareness can contribute to perpetuation of inequality. Fostering empathy and solidarity rather than competing over who suffers more will help make stronger coalitions for social change. To increase awareness and education about the various forms of discrimination and oppression leads to a people with a greater understanding. We live in a time where people are led to believe that the suffering or difficulty they are going through is greater than the suffering or struggle of another individual or group. This leads to competing with one another rather than working together to combat the harm that white supremacy and coalition and exploitation does to all of us. Dr. King says, our present urgent necessity is to seize our internal fighting and turn outward to the enemy using every form of mass action yet known and resolve never to let them rest. In solidarity, we strive for a stronger democracy. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Today, many of us believe in a myth about political power, that it's far away, out of reach, durable, long-lasting, unchanging. We see it all the time in the news. Headlines on the climate crisis. Another corporation dumping oil into the sea. Another corporation putting pollutants in our air. We see it in a headline of another school shooting, of more school children lost to our gun violence. We see it in the headlines on war causing more war. But it's a myth of political power that it's unchanging. Because when there is no hope, when we feel like there is no hope, hope belongs in our hands. We have 14 months to keep hope alive. We have until November 2024 to make the biggest decision of our lives. Whether we allow fascism to continue to rise, or whether we, the people, rise. We have until November 2024 to figure out how we put down our distractions, how we prioritize, and figure out what's important to us. Because this battle between dark and light is the most important thing in our lives. We all have more time in a day than we know. To phone bank, to knock on people's doors, to write letters to voters in swing states, to wave signs on street corners, and most importantly, to cast our ballots and to get other people to do the same. The battle between dark and light won't be won by words alone, but by physical conduct. The physical conduct of mobilizing, energizing, and organizing. Where it seems like there is no light, we are the beacons of light, because political power is not unchanging. It's not durable, it's not long-lasting, it's fragile. And it depends on each one of us to take a hold of it, to make the decision with our own hands, because these hands change. We have the power to change things. So let's do it. Protect and promote democracy. Thank you.
You can see why I didn't say so much about the Freedom Center, right? Let our young people do the heavy lifting. Thank you so much, Arsema and Finn. Yes. On the back of tonight's program, you'll see a list of friends of this evening's lecture, and looking out across the crowd, I can pretty safely say just about everybody here this evening is a friend of the Barbara Lee and Elihu Harris Lecture Series, and we deeply appreciate each and every one of you. I do want to point out this evening's sponsors, a very special, we have strong labor participation in this year's series. Our sponsors right on for this evening include AFSCME, 3299. I think Libertad Ayala is here this evening. Libertad's daughter Isel is one of the students at the Freedom Center right now. Wonderful connection. California Waste Solutions, California Nurses Association, Golden State Warriors, and Miguel Guerrero with the Golden State Warriors Foundation is also here this evening. Miguel, so happy to have you. IBEW Local 595, the Institute for Community Leadership, NorCal, Carpenters Union, and Blaisdell's Business Products. So thank you to our sponsors. We cannot do the work we do at the Freedom Center without generosity of our sponsors and, of course, everyone here this evening. We would also like to acknowledge some of our electeds here tonight. We just had a meeting, was it yesterday, Nate, with our supervisor, Nate Miley, who's here this evening with his beautiful wife. So good to have you both here. We're working on some projects together that we're very excited about. The Oakland City Council member, Kevin Jenkins, is here this evening. Hi, Kevin. And Seth Stewart from the office of Dan Kalb is with us tonight. The Vice Mayor of Berkeley, Ben Bartlett, is here. Brianna Decker, the Office of Supervisor Keith Carson, and a couple of our formers, but one's very near and dear to our heart, former Peralta trustee Linda Handy is here this evening, and Dr. Bill Riley, former trustee, as well as former Oakland City Council member Leo Brazil. Did I miss any elected officials? And former mayor. Oh, yes, well, he comes in a few moments. Thank you, Linda. I'd also like to point out a couple of important people to the Freedom Center. I get to mention Bill Riley's name again, our board members that are here tonight. Alton Jelks, longtime friend and advisor to the Freedom Center, as well as Dr. Bill Riley. And of course, Elihu Harris is the chairman of our board. So our next speaker, namesake, one of the two namesakes of the lecture series. And I just want to say that, Elihu means so much to so many of us, the brilliant political mind, just kind of a go-to for just about anybody that has ever pondered running for office and or running for office, but also just a truly humble and dedicated public servant, someone that our staff relies on tremendously for guidance and wisdom, and I think you could safely say our chief headlight at the Freedom Center. Please give it up for our esteemed mentor and dear brother, Elihu Harris. I'm not going to go into the long list of formers, Elihu.
Well, good evening. Well, I tell you, any man who's not humble is not married. I'm really happy to see all of you here tonight. You know, we've been through a lot with the pandemic, and we've had a lot of our gatherings by Zoom, but there's nothing like the real thing. And that's where we can share fellowship, we can share each other, and understand the opportunity. I want to apologize for the absence of the Queen. You know who the Queen is, right? All right, I want to make sure none of you are confused. You all live in the Queendom, or close to it. I talked to her this evening, and she was flying back from Los Angeles, going to Monterey and Salinas, and as you know, she's running for the United States Senate. And if you've never really seen Barbara Lee campaign, she is serious as a heart attack. Yeah, she's got her head down and she's moving straight ahead. But the one thing that I think is important about Barbara's candidacy, and politics is always a challenge and it's always difficult, but what I love about Barbara is, unlike a lot of politicians, Barbara is authentic. What you see is what you get. Some people are fake, you know, they're smile in your face and have a whole different attitude. But Barbara is committed to public service. She's committed to the maximization of the human potential. And this state would be very lucky if they would be represented by Congresswoman Barbara Lee. Tonight, we're here to celebrate democracy, but we're here to celebrate the effort to try to achieve the American dream. The Martin Luther King Freedom Center and the lecture series is really focused on something that I think is tremendously important, and that is we want to narrow the gap between the American dream of justice and equality and the reality of racism and economic oppression. We've seen this for many years, and certainly in our namesake, Martin Luther King, we saw a struggle for justice and equality that required an ultimate sacrifice, and that was his life. So how can any of us who share that dream and share that struggle do any less than to work and give our lives in service to each other and to making sure that we have the opportunity to leave a legacy for our children that reflects that commitment and that level of devotion? So tonight, I'm really happy and honored to introduce one of my really good friends. And I've known him a very long time. And if I tell you how long I've known him, you know how both of us are. But let me tell you, when I first caught a glimpse of him, I didn't even meet him, because he was like a quasi-celebrity, because he was hanging out with Huey Newton and Bobby Seale. And I said, wow, who is that guy that's wearing that tam and that leather jacket? That was the unofficial uniform of the Panthers. And I didn't understand exactly about our speaker, because he was always there. But when he wasn't protesting and marching, he was in class getting an education. And that shows you that you can do both at the same time. It's not either or, it's both and. And then when he graduated from school, graduated from college, he got involved in the struggle for justice and equality on the political side. Worked in campaigns, worked to elect individuals who would be about change, who were committed to making sure that the civil rights movement was more than just words. And he worked in campaigns in Oakland, throughout the South, Washington, D.C., and wherever he felt he could make a difference. And as you read his story, as you read this book, what you're really going to get is a sense of the journey that many of us have been on, and that we ask all of you to continue. The idea that we can, in fact, make a difference. The idea that we can maximize the human potential of our children should not be a dream. And those of us who have been in the Bay Area, who lived and grew up in Oakland and the East Bay, I think we fully understand that, this is not something that happens not only overnight, but it doesn't happen without a continuing struggle. The young people who are part of the Martin Luther King Freedom Center really exemplify that level of devotion and commitment, and quite frankly, give all of us encouragement that the future is going to be brighter than the past, because they share that dream. They learned about the dream. They learned about how to do nonviolent conflict resolution, how to express themselves verbally, and how to do the work, knocking on doors, talking to people about community engagement and working in elections and voting. That's the kind of work that the Martin Luther King Freedom Center is doing. Those are the kind of young people that they're inspiring and training to lead us into the future. So tonight, we're here to learn a little bit more about our past, because those who don't know where they came from often have very little idea where they're going. We want to make sure that people understand that we are building a legacy based on a foundation of people, of individuals many of you may never have heard of before, and hopefully our speaker will talk about that tonight and give you a sense of some of the individuals who overcame the odds, who didn't worry about numbers, but worried about organizing, worried about getting people connected and giving people a sense of the possibilities that politics could bring to all of us. So tonight, we're going to learn some new things, and we're going to perhaps be a little bit more inspired as we consider how we continue to pursue that American dream. So I'd like to introduce to some of you, and for others, just recognize again a real brilliant political mind who's been involved in campaigns again throughout the Bay Area, throughout the state and the country, Virgil Morell.
You know, before I get started, first, thank you, all of you. Thank you very much for the introduction. But I heard two speeches tonight that I was just so proud of and so impressed with. The two young ladies here, that is our future. That is our future. And so part of what I'm supposed to discuss is where do we go from here? We need to ask them. That's part of our problem, right? But before I get started, I'd like to reintroduce a couple of people and introduce one. You know, the Honorable Gordon Barranco. He is a true star in our community. His brother and I graduated from high school together at Oakland High way back in 2002. I also want to just thank Linda Handy for just fighting the good fight. And not just fighting the good fight, but winning most of them. I want to thank my friend, my dear friend, who introduced me to the computer, Leo Bazile. Where's Leo? Leo. He said, Verge, you got to write. You really got to do this. You're the only one that can do it. I said, I can't type. He said, just peck. So I pecked out about 800 plus pages. It got reduced to about 400 and some odd pages to the pecking. So I might have learned during that process. But the inspiration for me to write came from my niece, my brother Bill Riley's daughter, Risha Riley. When she was quite young, perhaps in high school, she said, Uncle, you need to write your story. I hadn't paid any attention to it. You need to write your story. And then later she said, I'll transcribe. You know, we're talking about transcription. That's a long time ago, right? And I said, that's a lot of work for somebody. I said, nah, that's okay. Well, we'll figure it out. So I don't think she's here tonight. I saw her last night. And I just want to thank her for encouraging me and giving me the inspiration. And just to remember, every time I got ready to write, I would say, Risha said, you need to really do this. So a child shall lead us. And I want to thank my brother, Bill, Dr. Riley. Last night, if you were not there, you missed an awesome ceremony where they named the stadium after William Bill Riley. He's here with my sister-in-law, Adrian, whom I've known almost as long as Bill has known her. And love her to death, great human being, great counselor, always doing the right thing. But one final note on Bill. He is my hero. We all have heroes. And sometimes we look outside of the family for them. I was fortunate. I'm the older brother, and he's my hero. Because he was steadfast, and he led by example. He led by doing. He's an educator's educator. And for that, I more than appreciate him, my brother Bill. Some of you want to know different things about what I might say. I want to say just a few words about the beginning of Newton and Seal. I don't want to go too far into it, just a little bit, because there's so many other things to talk about. to move toward our future. This afternoon, Leo Bazile, Paul Cobb, and I went out to visit Bobby Seale. And we should all remember the legend that he has created for himself, Bobby Seale. And we should pray for him. We should pray for him as we should pray for each other and those that have gone before us that we don't often think about, but we should. We had a great visit, and we talked about getting started and so on, and how we started Soul Students Advisory Council. I had the pleasure of being the first chairman of Soul Student, primarily because Bobby wasn't a full-time student. So he said, I think you're going to have to be the chairman. So that meant that I had to register the organization with the school. And I did so with a lady that's no longer with us, was a beautiful human being. I don't think most of you know her, Catherine Jones. Do any of you remember her? Catherine Jones. And she taught me things that I never thought I would need to know, like Robert's Rules of Order. I was a member, I'll tell you this quick story. I was a member of the Interclub Council as a result of being chairman of the Soul Students. So I go to these Interclub Council meetings, and all these people around the table that none of them looked like me. I was the only one there that looked like me. And so they were talking, and I raised my hand. You know how we do when we go to meetings in our community, we just start talking, right? So I raised my hand, and nobody recognized me. So I kept hearing this whole thing about point of information, point of order. By that time, I was so upset I didn't know what to do. So I said, point of order. And he said, to what point do you rise to? I said, to the point I want to speak. I wasn't embarrassed. I didn't have enough sense to know I was embarrassed. So afterwards, Ms. Jones grabbed me and pulled me to the side. She said, Mr. Morrell, I want you to sign up for the leadership class. And I knew she must have knew something that I didn't know. So I signed up for it, and I said, Robert Rules of Order don't work in every community, but it works. So let me move forward, and then we started something called Negro History. You remember that program, the Jefferson, when the guy says, you don't mind if I take my time getting used to the word black. First I was colored, then I was Negro. Now you're trying to tell me I'm black. You remember that episode? So that's what we started off with, Negro. And then we started the Black History class, but we had made a mistake. We forgot to ask for a black instructor. So we ended up with a white instructor, Dr. Rodney Carlisle, who took the Negro history thing all the way to Rutgers University and retired as a tenured professor, wrote several books about us. And so we said, well, we can't complain because he might cancel the class. So we left it like it was. And he and I have become friends over the years, and it's been a good relationship. But learning is learning. So we learned how not to make those sort of mistakes again. The following semester, if you remember him, Dr. Kenneth Good came around. And he taught the class in the evening called African Civilization. And from all of that, we developed Black Studies. The first chairman was Melvin Newton. I believe that's right. So San Francisco State, I said, now, Benny, now you know you guys were not first. And he said, well, why don't we just compromise? I said, we were the first four-year institution. I said, I can buy that. And so that's what happened. So let's just move on a little forward and try to get there a little quicker to where we need to get to. Democracy isn't in shambles, it's being competed for. What kind of democracy do we want? Some say they want autocracy. Others say we want to participate and not be dictated to. We're going to have to fight for that. You're going to have to absolutely fight for it, just like they are. The guy in Texas, dead wrong, failed to get impeached because we're talking about something some of us forget to understand. This is about what kind of America do we want? And you're not going to get it by sitting down. You're going to get it by voting. You're going to get it like Fannie Lou Hamer said, I'm tired of being sick and tired. She was so tired of being sick and tired that she moved to act. The youngest of 20 kids doing her share of cotton picking. You guys know what I'm talking about. Some of you have done some of that. But we must understand that freedom and equality must be earned and fought for. Cannot be an intellectual discussion. Cannot be that. I stand by 3 fundamental principles that lead to freedom. At least I think it does, or should. One is the judicial system. The other is voting. The last, but not necessarily in this order, is education. We rise through education. We rise by voting, and we hold on to it with the courts. We hold on to it with those who have fought, like Constance Motley, you know that name? First African-American woman on the federal bench, considered for the Supreme Court. Thurgood Marshall, we don't have to talk about him. We know who he is. And talk about him in the sense that for me to share with you who he is, I think we know. I wrote some notes, but I left most of them on the plane. But, and I called, and they couldn't tell me where my notes are. But I want to say this too. And then I'll get into the substance of most of this. We cannot earn all the freedoms that we need alone. We need friends. But we need our friends to stand up. I'm not talking about the ones that stands up and leads us over a cliff. I'm talking about middle America. I'm talking about the people that Democrats and Republicans say we need to protect the middle class. They need to be our friends. They say they are, but they're quiet about it. We need to hear from them. Because when you cater to that element of society, when you do that, you're saying we need them. So if you know and they know they are needed, then we need them too. We need them too. And if they speak up, if they rise, we will rise and we'll all rise together. Because guess what? The Constitution, I never read anything about the United States Constitution that said, we the black people or we the white people. It said, we the people. And it'll never happen until we do our part. It's not you in here not going to the polls and voting. It's you in here that don't tell your neighbor and take that neighbor to the polls. We must help one another to do the right thing. Why is voting important? Could you ever figure out why, if voting wasn't important, why the effort is made for us not to vote? There must be some power there somewhere. There must be some power there. And if we don't understand that, we got a real problem. It's not the neighbors, it's us. If you look in the mirror, we will see what the issue is. Voting is foundational to this society. We will not win our freedom with guns and bullets and so on. We will win it with an education. We'll win it by voting. And we'll win it through the courts. Plessy versus Ferguson to Brown versus Board of Education, going back to 1860 to the Civil Rights Act, to the first Civil Rights Bill, that was canceled by the Supreme Court in 1883. Now, if we know this, let's bring it home. Let's say right here in Oakland, California, voters determine their public policy lifestyle. It's not about the chief of police. It's about the philosophy of policing. It's about who's going to be a police officer. It's not the chief. Oh, there's no chief in Oakland now, but they got police officers. So it is a philosophy on how you police the people. And that's what we got to understand, that voting allows for you to make that decision. And if you're unwilling to make that decision, we'll continue to suffer here in Oakland. We'll continue to suffer. And we'll say, yeah, man, that sure was bad yesterday. It's going to get worse. I'm not here to make you feel good. I'm here to tell you what I think. What I think. And I don't have to be right. It's my perception based on my experience, what I've seen. And let me tell you, it ain't all been good. It ain't. Not it isn't. It ain't all been good. I want to just say this. In a democracy, the voters are the Constitution. They are the people. Don't we get it? I said the same thing before in a different way, but I got to get you to understand it. You know, we talk about Trump. And we talk about, oh man, is Trump going to go to jail? It doesn't matter whether he goes to jail or not. There's still DeSantis out here. There's still all these other people out here that are scared of that element of voters. Why don't they get to be scared of us as voters? Let's not focus on them. Let's focus on us. The problem we have with the judicial system is that it's all connected to voting. Can you see that? All of it is connected to voting, but it's also connected to education. There's a lady, and she said, her name, some of you may know the name. Her name was Charlotte Fortin Grimke. You guys ever heard of her? Charlotte Grimke was the first black teacher to work at the Penn School, a school established to help educate the newly freed enslaved. And she also worked with the Department of Treasury to recruit black teachers. The first known graduate student in math she taught, Kelly Miller, became the dean at Howard University. We have so many heroes out here. There's so many Bill Rileys have been throughout history, so many Linda Handys throughout history. Eliu's important, Leo's important, all our elected officials are important, but the educators are the educators. We couldn't get there without them. And let's be clear on that. Let's be very clear on that. The commitment to quality education is a must. Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Appreciate you. Appreciate you. We must demand excellence from us and transmit that to our youth. We have that responsibility. You know, the people, our ancestors, that arrived here on that dreaded slave ship back in 1619 from the coast of West Africa, when they did that, you know, I never understood until later about only the strong survive. You remember that song Jerry Butler used to sing? I said, now I know. Only the strong survive. That's us. That's all of us. The importance of that is they made a way out of no way. And we're crying, oh man, I didn't get that job yesterday. Oh, I didn't get that promotion. They were getting out of chains so that we can live the kind of life to pass down. And I have to insist on us understanding that, because it is our past. You said it, Elihu. If we don't understand our past, how can we ever know about our future? How can we know, and how can we assist in that? By the silence, I'm going back and forth for a purpose. By the silence of our not voting, we will remain voiceless. It doesn't matter if Barbara Lee's in the United States Senate. It doesn't matter if Obama is the president of the United States, or that the vice president might become president one day. It doesn't matter if we don't do our job. We act like we're on political, social, and economic welfare. That's how we act. And we want to talk about the people on AFDC. But we don't want to talk about our inadequacies and why we're in the condition that we're in, because if we don't participate, it's on us. Our dream of a more perfect union can only be realized through our participation. It's just not going to fall out the sky and say we're now perfect. It's just not going to happen. And remember, the other side, they're going to fight us as we try to move toward that vision of a perfect nation, a more perfect nation. Even the founders couldn't find an answer, and they left it up in the air. You guys figure it out. Let the future figure it out. All we want is a monetary system, which Hamilton gave us. They didn't realize, or if they did realize, they don't know what they did to us. The one thing that they did to us is that they made us understand that freedom isn't free. We went all the way to I say we because it represented us, the Dred Scott decision. It wasn't about Dred Scott, was it? It was about black people. And it was so odd because in 5 other states, black people had the right to vote. That's how contradictory the system is. The nation and the founders didn't know what kind of government they wanted. Should they be an individual state? Should it be a republic? Should it be a federation? So they fought. They fought it out for a nation. And guess who they gave up to have this nation? Well, we became 3/5. 3/5 of a whole. So they gave us up to form this nation. We've had many people in our history to thank. Alexander Twilight, I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He was the first African American to gain a college degree from Middlebury College in Vermont. He also was the first African American to get elected to a state legislature, which was Vermont, in 1836. Mary Jane Patterson went to Oberlin College and became the first African American woman with a college degree. She ended up at the first black public high school in the country. You know where it was? Washington, D.C., called Dunbar, Paul Lawrence Dunbar. there's a lot going on. We've had people like Malcolm X, people like, you ever heard of Robert Williams? You heard of Robert Williams? I know you have. Robert Williams was the president of the North Carolina NAACP. He ran the Klan out of town, and finally they said, you're going to have to leave here, brother. They're going to come after you, and they're going to come after us too. So he ended up going to Cuba and beyond. You heard a book called Niggas with Guns. You ever heard of it? That's part of where the Black Panther Party got their idea from, other than the Lowndes County. And I say that to say that there were people that fought for their freedom. And we said, I hope you don't get killed. People said to me, have you seen the movie on Emmett Till? I said, no. When do you plan to see it? It was a good movie. How could that be a good movie? I sold Jet Magazine. You guys ever heard of Swan's 10th Street Market? I sold Jet Magazine right there in 1956, 55, when they talked, when the Emmett Till was on the, I remember it, and I can never forget it. So no, we've had some struggles. We've had the Scottsboro boys. Remember them? It's tough out here, but it's not as tough for us as it was for them. It's easier for us. And thank God it is. And thank God for them. Thank God for Fannie Lou Hamer. Thank God for Ella Baker. You know who Ella Baker was? And Diane Nash. You know the name Diane Nash? Diane Nash was the architect of the voting rights agenda in, was it Birmingham? In Birmingham. We never hear about her. You used to hear about me and Leo and Elihu because we were doing the press conferences. But the backroom support was being supplied by people like Edith Austin and so on, and Alfreda Abbott and all those folks. We must bring our sisters along with us, and we must consider them. And we must consider them to be an equal partner in our liberation. We've all suffered. We've all suffered greatly. I'm going to close this thing out, and I'm going to say, I was supposed to mention Dorothy Height. You know who Dorothy Height was? I met Dorothy Height. We were in a meeting together planning the second major conference, like the Gary Conference. It was called Going Back to Gary. This time we were supposed to talk about economics. And so Miss Height was in a meeting. We met in her office at NCNW on Pennsylvania Avenue. She bought a building on Pennsylvania Avenue, right down the street from the White House. She bought that building. That's major. On prime real estate. And so she was a part of the leadership of King, Whitney Young, A. Philip Randolph, John Lewis, and somebody else, a fifth person I'm missing. What was the problem with that? Nobody knew that she's a part of that leadership. When we sat down in a room, and Miss Height, you know how you have all these sidebar conversations and meetings? We're all good at that. When Miss Height was talking, no one said a word. That's how wonderful, powerful, and influential she was. So I wanted to mention her and Fannie Jackson. Fannie Jackson was born a slave. She wrote a letter to Frederick Douglass. Now, she was born a slave. She wrote a letter. She wrote a letter, born a slave, to Frederick Douglass. So we know how many years ago that was, right? And she said, I feel sometimes like a person to whom childhood was entrusted some sacred flame. This is the desire to see my race lifted out of the mire of ignorance. The mire of ignorance. Weakness and degradation, no longer to sit and obscure and devour the scraps of knowledge which his superiors flinging at him. I want to see him crowned with strength and dignity, with the enduring grace of intellectual attainment. Now, a slave wrote that. And we're crying? So each one teach one concept still exists, right? Man, I tell you, and she became an educator. See, we can't go too far without educators. We just can't get very far. Northern California, and I'm gonna close it out. Northern California. Have you heard of Jeremiah Sanderson? Jeremiah Sanderson started the first public school in Sacramento in 1856, largely responsible for desegregating the schools in California. There were no schools in Southern California. They were all up here between San Jose, Stockton, Sacramento, Oakland, and San Francisco. He had a daughter that became the first black teacher in Oakland, but it wasn't called Oakland then. It was called Brooklyn. You know about Brooklyn, the neighborhood of Brooklyn? Very much a part of Oakland, isn't it? And that was about maybe 40 years before the esteemed Ida Jackson took over. So we've had a long and a very, very rich history. We're going to talk the final about the youth. Where do we go from here? I'm riding with them. And to sum it up, I'm riding with them. What the youth need to understand is that we're here as elders to answer questions for them. But we're not here to lead them. They're going to lead us. But they must be wise enough to ask Elihu, to ask Bill questions. They must be wise enough to do that. They will be. Fannie said, and I keep going back and forth, and but I want to tell you this about Fannie. You remember the 1964 National Convention in Atlantic City, New Jersey? Lyndon Baines Johnson wanted to be elected in his own right. If you remember, he became president as a result of Kennedy's assassination. The Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party was split in terms of the white Democratic Party in Mississippi. They didn't want to seat them as delegates. So they had a hassle about that. And Johnson sent everybody he knew to talk to him. He sent John Lewis, he sent everybody. And the last person he sent to talk to him was Hubert Humphrey. If you recall, Hubert Humphrey was a Senate minority leader. There was no vice president because after Kennedy's assassination and when Johnson became president, there was never confirmed another person to be vice president. So a black perspective and a white perspective. Verna Cancer, who was the regional director, remember Verna? For up in Sacramento. She was on the credentials committee. She had a conversation with Fannie. And she said, you know, Fannie, I want to be with you. I really do. But here's the problem. Keep in mind now, this is the black perspective. Here's the problem. If Johnson isn't president, then my husband won't get a federal judgeship. The white perspective. Humphrey says, Fannie, the white liberals, Leo, you know I'm going to take care of you. And will you please not testify at the credentials committee? And she said, Hubert, you know, you've been good to us. But if you don't speak up on this, you'll never be any good for anybody. That's what she told him. And then she said, I had to sit at home at night, phone ringing off the hook, with threats of violence against me. All because I want to be an American with the right to vote. That's what I'm talking about. Now, Fannie is my hero. She did more with less than anybody else, right? She took a beating. Norman, I know you know. She took a beating in jail by 2 black prisoners. When one got tired, the other one started beating her. She never complained. So who's the weakest sex in that instance? So I wanted to close out with her because she is my shero. And remember, where we go from here, I had it right here to tell you. I said something like, I had to get another book that I was going to give to somebody else and try to highlight it. And I haven't done anything because I just said, to hell with it. I'm just going to come with it like it is. I'm not a clairvoyant. I'm not a mystic. But this I do know. We need to achieve power in our communities. Don't worry about Washington. Control your community. You know what they did? What I call them the crazy right? They began to work and take over local governments and the state legislatures. That's why we can't win reapportionment battles. That's why they're having a fight. You see now that they're questioning in Alabama now, and they're appealing again not to add a second potential black congressional seat. And they got the votes in the legislature, but they may or may not have them in the courts, depending. Courts are like us sometimes. They can be quite fickle. And so that is my message to you. That is our future rests with our youth. And we must do all that we can to help them help us so that we can become one America. It's not going to happen in my lifetime or yours, maybe not even theirs, but we can't quit. The march is long, but not as long as it was for Crispus Attucks, not as long as it was for Frederick Douglass. So what am I complaining about? You know the old story, my life has been no crystal stair. You know that story. So I'm closing, I'm done. With all of the redundancy, I'm done. But I want to thank you, and thank you very much for having me here. I appreciate you, appreciate all of you, because I know we're going to get there. Is that okay? Yes. Oh, okay.
Virgil, thank you very much. First, I want to say, Virgil talked about people not remembering the 1964 Democratic Convention. We got some young people here who don't remember the 2004 Democratic Convention. The other thing I wanted to say is, one of the things Virgil didn't talk about a lot is his book. And you should get that book for yourself and for your children in pursuit of America's promise. Because, again, if you don't know where you came from, you will have no idea where you're going. And those who don't understand history have no sense of the promise of tomorrow. So just get that book. I'm surprised he didn't bring him with him. But I've got the book. And if I could see better, I'd read it. A couple things real quick. 3x5 cards are available for those of you who have questions. But I've got a question that I think is really important to me, and I hope to you as well. One of the aspects of Virgil's book is the history of politics in the East Bay. There are names of people that I bet almost no one in this room has ever heard of, like D.G. Gibson. D.G. Gibson was the person who was the architect that helped to elect the first black member of the California State Legislature from Northern California, Byron Rumford. They did it in the basement in West Oakland. And this is how history is so recent. When I went to work for John Miller after getting out of law school, D.G. Gibson was not only still alive, but he was working, well, he wasn't working, he was getting paid by John Miller because of his legacy and his history. He was an old man, but he needed work. He wasn't getting any money, didn't have much in the way of Social Security, but John Miller gave him a job. And I say that because sometimes we forget those who built the bridges, who paved the roads that we travel on. And people who forget their history really have no future. So I want to ask Virgil, talk just briefly about some of those individuals that were elected, that worked to get people elected, that ultimately gave us the Barbara Lees, the Lionel Wilsons, and yeah, even a poop butt mayor.
You want me to do that, Giselle?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do that.
Before Virgil answers that question, so our young people are circulating the room, and if you want to use that 3x5 card to ask a question, just slightly raise it, and they're going to come and collect them from you, and we'll bring them up to Mr. Morrell. Thank you.
In response to Elihu's comments, you know, in this town, we never had any black elected officials, save for one. The first one was the incredible Barney Hilburn. And we should always remember Barney. He was a great man, and many of the African-American teachers would not have been there without Barney. Of course, Lionel Wilson. There was Clinton White, John Burris. There was the Niagara Democratic Club, which I was fortunate enough to be the founder and the co-founders. Some are here. Elihu was one of the founding members. And when the city council, there was not one black elected official on the Oakland City Council. There was a black on the council, but not one that was elected. Do you know, with our commitment to Niagara Movement Democratic Club, and we took up the mantle from Du Bois and Trotter, Trotter being Monroe Trotter, who's the uncle, by the way, uncle-in-law of Josh Rose. Most don't know that. We knew that we could not organize in the same form and method that the Black Panther Party did. But we wanted something, we wanted the same thing, but we went about it differently. We decided that we're going to take over City Hall. We wanted to do that. Do you know, in a reasonable period of time, there were 3 of the founding members on the Oakland City Council: Wilson Rouse Jr., Leo Bazile, and Elihu Harris as mayor. I've hosted Jimmy Carter, Walter Mondale, and numbers of others, but my single greatest feeling was that, just look at the council and see 3 members of Niagara. Isn't that amazing? But we did it with work. And they had the intellectual gift and the charm to get elected. There were other people in this town. Do you know Alfreda Abbott? Alfreda was the second African American to get elected on the city council. You know Bawapa? Bawapa was founded by Edith Austin. You know that name? The late, great Edith Austin, who would tell Elihu off, me off, and everybody else off. Willie Brown told us all. But she loved us all, too. She loved her black men. But anyway, the Margaret Amaro. Remember Margaret Amaro, any of you? Oh, there were just so many. And the reason why I mentioned it earlier is because there's just so many wonderful giants in this city that did their work. There were people like Clinton White. You know what Clinton White is? There's a story about Clinton White. He told a judge, you were dumb in law school and you're still dumb. I mean, that's how good he was. And when he would try a case, he was so mesmerizing that you just couldn't ever forget. You could not ever forget it. There were so many other wonderful people, like Taria Hall Pittman. Did I mention Taria? Negro in the News. Remember that show? KDIA, Negro in the News. So there's much for us to celebrate, but that was yesterday. So we're going to use yesterday to go forward with those lovely people that I saw earlier that's up here speaking. And when they call Elihu and Linda and anyone else for advice, you guys are going to give it to them, and I know you are. So that's what I did not, I didn't talk about the Oakland politics, because I think a lot of you here know and some don't. But you read I got to leave something to the imagination. You know, so read my book. I didn't talk about Kent State. You remember Kent State? You remember Jackson State? I'm glad you guys do. Were there 2 Americas? As far as Kent State was concerned, and Jackson State, there were 2. But the truth is that parents said on Kent State, we didn't send our kids up here to get shot up by the National Guard. But we didn't have anybody to say that for our kids at Jackson State and be heard. That's why we got to come together to make this work. We cannot make this work alone. But at the same time, we have to manage, we have to be the senior partners in our relationship. We cannot be beholden to that element that like to lead us around and tell us what's good for us. Elihu knows what's good for us. So does Bill and so does Leo. We don't need them to tell us that. I'm going to follow Elihu before I follow anybody else that don't look like him. Okay, so that's why I sort of left it alone. There's just too much there. There's just too much. Questions?
Yes, Mr. Morrell,
Yes.
We have another question for you. This one is, I agree with you about the importance of voting and participation in local government affairs. My guess is most everyone in the room does also. What advice do you have to reach the many people, Black and brown youth, who don't agree? How is it done in other parts of the country?
Well, let me put it like this. I want to be concerned about this part of the country, because every city in America has a different political dynamic. We don't have in Oakland bossism like they do in Chicago, St. Louis, and New York, Philadelphia, and Boston, where you can say, I want Mary Savoy on the city council because she's done her work, so we can put her on the city council. No one's going to run against her. That's not how we do it here in Oakland. And that's not what the system is. And so the answer, my answer or my response is, we must do our work locally, because all politics is local. You may spread out, but all politics is local. We must not be afraid to work locally. It's easy to do the national piece, far more difficult to do the local piece. But the local piece is where we need. The local piece is where we need to help, where we need to support. So I would say start right here at home.
That's right. Thank you. Mr. Morrell, a follow-up question to that then is, what are the top priorities we should be working on in the Oakland community?
Registering to vote. Registering to vote, walking precincts on a regular basis. Let's not walk and register voters because somebody asked us to because they're running for office. Let's do it because it's in our interests. That's what I would say. And get involved in your government. Get involved with Peralta. Get involved with Peralta. Get involved with the city government in Oakland. Get involved. Don't wait for your roommate or teammate to come get you. Go and start. Starts with the first step.
Thank you.
That's what I would say.
And the next question, what 3 suggestions would you give the current leadership in Oakland, both elected and non-elected, to build our political and economic power?
Government and the understanding of government is a science. It's a study of understanding how, it's an understanding of how it comes together, how it's integrated. People want neighborhood community development. They can't have it unless the city is thriving. And from the city, it branches out into the neighborhoods. How can you have economic development in the neighborhoods and you don't have any money and no resources? You don't like paying taxes, well, actually no one does. But the point is, it has to flow from the top. And the only way it can do that is by understanding that it does. People in local government here in Oakland today, they're there. And they're there, whether it's by default or any other reason. They're there. They ran for the office. And if they didn't win, and you wanted them to win, maybe you didn't do enough. So the leadership that is there has to be either supported or challenged. There are no in-betweens on that. You have to support them or challenge them. But you can't challenge them out of petty egos. You got to challenge them on substance, on public policy, what you're not doing. For an example, someone recently said, it was all in the press, that the staff was late in submitting a proposal. That's the leadership. That's not staff, that's leadership. I was surprised at the response from leadership on that question. If you really feel that way, you should have done to that person what you did to the chief, fire. So that's my basic feeling on that.
Building off of that, you talked about facing challenges. And so how can you face these challenges? How do you get over the fear that comes with facing those challenges and use your voice to advocate for things that matter?
With effort.
How do you get over the fear of advocating and taking action and using your voice?
With the first step. With the very first step. And you must take that first step if you want to deal with it. If you need help in dealing with it, maybe you have a friend. But you must take that first step. That's how you get over it. Is that about it?
We got a couple more.
Okay.
More and more people are expressing mistrust of both the Democratic and the Republican parties.
I'm
They
sorry?
say more and more people are expressing mistrust of both the Democratic and Republican parties. They say voting is futile. What would you say to these people?
I would say they're right. to have misgivings about either party. And the reason I would say that they're right is because I don't understand why anyone should be owned by one party. Why we don't put demands on political parties to support our agenda or what's best in our community. So no, I don't think we should be owned by the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, either one. We are engaged more often than not with the Democratic Party because the other side are filled with people that are mean-spirited. Clarence Thomas, for one. So we have to call it out. Clarence Thomas for one. Others for others. But it's not just Trump. It's a whole philosophical thing that's based on power and wanting. Remember now, it's what kind of America do you want? What kind do you want? If you haven't thought about it, then it's time to think about it. So you must just get involved, and maybe just by chance, you can change it. When we started the Democratic Club in Oakland, and the reason it was a Democratic club, they didn't control us. We control our own destiny. We control what we did. And so it doesn't matter the party so long as you are controlling your political priorities.
One question. What type of gathering or structure do you recommend for bringing together larger groups to discuss candidates and issues affecting our community?
I accept the question, but I reject the thought that I need to have a recommendation. I'm old school, and that's what we need to get away from. That question is an appropriate question, but you should be answering that question. I'm done. I'm done. You need to answer that question, and I'm going to leave that question with you. I'm done.
One more. This is our last question. How can we educate more people on the role and importance of courts and the judiciary in our democracy? Educate more people on the role and importance of the courts and the judiciary in our democracy.
Start teaching. What I mean by that, you need to talk to Mike. You need to talk to people like Leo Bazile, Elihu Harris, and Gordon Barranco. They are the legal eagles. I have to learn, and it took a while, to stay in my lane. My lane is that I study the government, I study the judicial system, but I will defer to the legal eagles. It's not for me, it's for me. So you have to study and understand your government. There are three branches of government. The executive branch, which consists of the president, the judicial branch, which consists of the federal court system, and what's the third one? Legislative. And there are supposed to be checks and balances, right? So the process is simple. Do your homework. Start reading and get a better understanding about your government. And when you don't know, or when you don't get the answer that you think you're looking for, then talk to the experts. Talk to Judge Horace Wheatley. He'll tell you. Talk to Leo, talk to Ella. These are lawyers, and they will tell you how to deal with that. But you must understand your government, and the only way you can understand it is to study the history of the government. Have you ever read the Federalist Papers? The Federalist Papers will tell you all you need to know about America. You ever study Alexander Hamilton and the financial system? Study about your government. Understand your government. Have you ever read the opinion on Dred Scott? Yes. Keep on reading and understanding. Yes, ma'am. They can't take them out. They can't take civics out of the public school system where parents get involved. I agree with you, but if you're taking civics out of it, parents must get involved. I don't disagree with that. I completely concur. Completely. Once again, thank you all very much. I'm humbled by your presence. That's a tough word for me to use.
One more round of applause for Mr. Virtual Morel.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Virtual. And as Mr. Morel is making his way down the stairs, just two housekeeping things. The young people from the Martin Luther King Jr. Freedom Center, we did ask for RSVPs, and many of you called. You've probably spoken to them on the phone. They're hosting this evening. We're old school community organizers. We don't use electronic Eventbrite and all that. Please greet the young people as you're leaving, and they will have baskets if you're inclined to make a donation to the good work of the Martin Luther King Jr. Freedom Center, striving to bring civics back to our schools and to uplift the message of our dear brother, Virtual Morel. Incredible, incredible call to action this evening. We thank you all for being here, and we look forward to the next lecture of the Barbara Lee and Elihu Harris Lecture Series. Thank you very much.